I too would like to begin by acknowledging the Jimoy Woollabura Yidinji people and their ongoing connection to and custodianship of the lands on which we meet today. And I pay my respects to elders past and present, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present here today in this room. So, after a series of sudden global shocks, the economic outlook is fragile. International law is fracturing and states are pivoting towards nationalist populism and strongman politics. There is widespread anxiety about machines replacing human labour, and wealth inequality is at an all-time high. Of course, I'm talking about the period surrounding the 1929 stock market crash. But I think it can be reasonable to assume that I was actually talking about today. By 1933, the Great Depression had reached its lowest point in the United States. The economy was in full retreat, bank failures numbered in the thousands, unemployment stood at 25%, and shanty towns dotted the landscape. Now then, few people at this point had ever heard of Ferdinand Bocora, another great Italian. The Sicilian immigrant was one of only a small minority of Italian lawyers working in 1930s New York. People whose surnames ended in vowels didn't often feature in newsprint, alongside the titans of finance at that time. But after leading a public inquiry into the causes of the 1929 stock market crash, he became a near daily fixture in newspapers and on radio broadcasts, and earned the nickname the Hellhound of Wall Street. His highly publicised investigations led to resignations, firings, and even jail sentences. It spurred reforms that still live on today through the US SEC, ASIC's counterpart, and most importantly, it helped to reignite confidence in a financial system that had fundamentally let people down. That is the power of public accountability, and that is the approach I've tried to champion together with all my commissioners in my term as ASIC Chair. An approach that I hope has been welcome to those of you who work on the front line of financial vulnerability. And today I will argue that in a volatile world, regulators cannot afford to work from behind closed doors. They must be active, they must be ambitious, and show that they are onto it. That's how people can have confidence that the system is working as it should. I will also share how ASIC is transforming to be that kind of regulator. I will outline the challenges ahead and how we can keep working together to protect Australians. But first, let's reflect on where we started. You might not be aware that ASIC is celebrating a significant birthday this year. It has been 35 years since we commenced operations as the Australian Securities Commission, or the ASC. The I would come much later. ASIC was born in the shadow of an economic downturn, and after a series of egregious corporate failures, the 1980s wasn't called the decade of greed for nothing. This was the era of bond and SCASE, of boom and bankruptcy. Some of you may recall that prior to the creation of ASIC, corporate regulation was the domain of the states and territories. Corporate registrars, as they were known, operating, and I quote, as purely administrative bodies, never considering that they had any significant function in respect to regulation. Even the National Companies and Securities Commission, a progenitor of ASIC, was required to delegate its functions as far as possible to the existing state or territory offices, and they operated on the budget of a small independent film. It took more than a century to institute a truly national system of corporate regulation, despite numerous attempts to do so, each precipitated by a similar cycle of corporate collapses and loss of public confidence. I want to pause here for a moment to reflect on what that meant. Confidence is the true currency of the financial system. Without it, the system just doesn't work as intended. Consider a bank scam victim who refuses to transact online after their money was stolen, or a natural disaster survivor who opts out of insurance entirely after their claim is unfairly rejected. The people in this room know all too well what that broken trust looks like. It walks through your doors every day. So maintaining confidence in the financial system is key, and Australia needed a corporate regulator that could do that. Which brings us to today. The ASIC of today is very different to the ASC established in 1991. We now regulate millions of entities across multiple sectors of our economy. Importantly, in 1998, we assumed regulatory responsibility for consumer protection in financial services. The same year we got the I in our name. And in 2010, we took on regulation of consumer credit. So our remit spans not only corporations, but insurance and superannuation, credit and banking, financial advice, and much more. This system-wide reach enables us to promote fair and efficient outcomes wherever Australians interact with the financial system. During my tenure as chair, ASIC has undertaken a significant organisational restructure to become a modern, confident and ambitious regulator. Modern, because we have prioritised data and technology to keep pace with the fast-changing financial system. Confident, because we are prepared to act decisively, publicly and proactively to address misconduct and emerging risks. And ambitious, because we are willing to raise the bar for ourselves and for the financial system that Australians rely on by testing the law and driving systemic change through every available channel. You can see this evidence of ambition in our work on financial hardship, which has led to improvements in how home lenders are supporting their customers, and in the significant penalty we are seeking against Westpac for their hardship failures. You can see it in our better banking surveillance reports, which resulted in banks committing to refund more than $160 million to low-income consumers. And you can see it in our efforts to pursue Signo Australia and BSF Solutions all the way to the High Court for alleged predatory lending practices. That work remains unfinished. Ambition is why I set up the ASIC Simplification Consultative Group to start to address regulatory complexity and to streamline interactions with ASIC for business and consumers. And it is why we launched our largest consumer campaign in a decade to better support Australians in retirement through Money Smart. I'm very proud of Money Smart, and you can continue to see growth in that service. It is no secret that the ASIC that I inherited had its challenges, following the Financial Services Royal Commission, among other things, and confidence has rightly been shaken in ASIC as a regulator. We faced criticism that we were a watchdog with no teeth. But today, ASIC is one of the most active enforcement agencies in the country. What that means is that we are in court somewhere in the country nearly every single day of the week, driving accountability for serious misconduct. That is literally true. Magistrates' courts around the country, Supreme Courts, Federal Courts, full court of the Federal Court, and the High Court. That is a massive investment by ASIC, and I'm very proud of it. And we are securing considerable penalties as well. Since my term began, we have more than doubled the number of formal investigations that we undertake per year, and more than quadrupled the value of penalties obtained. That means that we are acting on more reports of misconduct and intelligence gathered through our regulatory work. We are using our compulsory information gathering powers to force entities to produce documents, answer questions, and attend examinations under oath. And we are bringing these cases to court. So far this financial year, we have secured more than $411 million in penalties, not including those still subject to court approval. Our work has also seen approximately $421 million returned to investors in connection with the extraordinary situation that we're dealing with and that we continue to investigate in connection with the Shield Master Fund and First Guardian Master Fund. I am proud that we have people on the ground in every state and territory holding financial institutions to account, including those in regional communities. A recent highlight for me was opening our new Darwin office as part of our expanded presence in the Northern Territory. For many years, I thought this was rather shocking, but for many years we only had one person based in the Territory. That was unacceptable. when you consider the harm we have seen in recent years impacting First Nations consumers. Now we have a team in Darwin with broad expertise and deep local knowledge. We are in a better position to address the challenges that remote communities face engaging the financial system and to regulate entities operating in those communities, which I'm sure will be welcome news to many of you. And I'm proud to say that we are not conservative in the cases that we take on. Our recent enforcement action against Money3 for alleged breaches of responsible lending laws is an excellent example. We live and work in a complex regulatory system. We knew from the outset that this would be a challenging case. Responsible lending cases always are. But regardless, we felt that this was an important case to take on, given the serious concerns of consumer advocates and the severe impacts on the individuals involved. Many of these people were single parents surviving on Centrelink payments, left unable to purchase groceries or pay bills after entering into Money3 loans. Many were forced to seek assistance from charities or financial counsellors to get by. Indeed, I would like to recognise the financial counsellors here today for all the work you're doing. You are a critical part of supporting ASIC's work. You helped us, you worked alongside us and to help us contact clients impacted by the conduct we're investigating and ultimately secure the evidence required to run our case in court. We cannot run cases like this without your assistance, so your efforts are invaluable. Although the outcome of the case could be described as somewhat of a mixed bag, and in some respects disappointing, our appetite to act in this space is not diminished, it's not changed. So long as we have a reasonable basis to do so, we will continue to take on the hard cases where success is not guaranteed, and that includes continuing to test responsible lending laws. So, the ASIC of today is very, very different to the ASIC of the past. None of the changes I have described have occurred by accident, of course, but through the deliberate and at times through difficult decisions and the hard work of many, many people, too many to name here. However, I would like to acknowledge Commissioner Alan Kirkland, who's sitting right in front of me, well known to many of you, I'm sure, who's here with me today and who many of you will know well. And I want to acknowledge my Deputy Chair, who's unable to be here today, Sarah Court, who will become the next Chair of ASIC from June. I should also mention in passing, in case you hadn't noticed, there are in fact 7 or 8 other ASIC colleagues in the room, so if you get the chance to meet them, please do so. One of the significant decisions that Sarah and I made early on was to introduce a practice of ASIC announcing annually its enforcement priorities. For 4 years, we have announced those priorities at our annual forum. I'm told Sarah's speech has become a highly anticipated one in the market for that reason. Why is this so significant? Well, it provides clarity on where ASIC expends its resources and how we prioritise cases, which is important for a publicly funded agency. It has a different effect, a deterrent effect in its own right, and prevention is always better than cure, something I might come back to later. And perhaps most significantly, it requires ASIC to be accountable for doing what we said we would do. In certain quarters, it has been suggested that ASIC should be quieter about its work or do deals behind closed doors. However, I never want the public to lose confidence in ASIC again in the same way it did in more recent times after the Royal Commission. And maintaining confidence means telling people what you're doing, what you're going to do, and following through on it. Being a regulator is ultimately about making choices every day. We have to make difficult choices, but about what we litigate, what we investigate. But the thing about choice is that every time you say yes to one thing or to something, you're effectively saying no to something else. ASIC does not have unlimited resources, and the reality is that there are a limited number of cases we can bring each year. That is why being transparent about the choices we make and why we make them is so important. What many of you working on the front line may not realise, though, is that the information that you provide directly to us and to consumer advocacy and from consumer advocacy groups informs those choices. Many of the organisations represented here are long-standing members of ASIC's Consumer Consultative Panel. Indeed, I want to acknowledge Financial Counselling Australia Chief Executive Dominic Merrick, I think she must be sitting right in front of me, who is a representative on this panel, as well as Fiona Guthrie, who was a long-time member and has been a steadfast supporter of and collaborator with ASIC for many years. What this means in practice is that the information you provide may end up being discussed around our commission table, sometimes the next day or the next week. These valuable insights inform how we prioritise our resources. This leads me to one of the key points that I wanted to make today. ASIC is an incredibly active regulator, but we simply cannot be everywhere at once. And in these volatile times, it is more important than ever that we work together to address consumer harm. Consumer advocates and ASIC have a long history of collaborative action. Our hardship work was informed by intelligence from financial counsellors. At the very outset of our surveillance, you told us that people were falling through the cracks, and we listened. You helped us to gather the evidence we needed to pursue stop orders against Coral Coast distributors to prevent it from signing up customers to harmful credit products through Centrepay in its urban rampage stores. And it was your voices that helped us influence our decision to appeal our case against UPLA, which sent a strong deterrence message to anyone seeking to mislead Aboriginal consumers. In areas like hardship, we know there is more work to do by lenders. As I alluded to at the beginning, these are difficult times for many people in Australia, which makes it all the more pressing that lenders support customers experiencing financial hardship. Ensuring that customers know hardship assistance may be available and when and how to request that assistance is of critical importance. We are not taking a backward step on this issue, and we are continuing to keep an eye on how lenders are supporting their customers. And if hardship support breaks down, debt management and credit repair services should not leave people in an even greater financial difficulty, which is why in July we will reveal what's going wrong in this sector and what must change. Later this year, we will report on the harm we are seeing in debt collection and motor vehicle financing too. And let me be clear, if a model thrives on pressure, opacity or harm, ASIC will step in. The difficulties that many in our small business sector face right now are also top of my mind and the Commissioner's mind. We take referrals from the FCA's Small Business Debt Helpline very seriously. Where we see harm, we will take enforcement action. Where we see opportunities for improvement, we will engage with education and guidance. We will be releasing a refreshed small business strategy later this year to support these objectives. We are also alive to the risks that new technologies present. Already, we are removing record numbers of social media, phishing and investment scam websites, almost 12,000 in the past year alone. Artificial intelligence has turbocharged these online threats, and with the advent of agentic AI, which I personally find extraordinary, no one was talking about agentic AI even 12 months ago, these numbers will only go in one direction, up. ASIC is committed to building the financial literacy of Australians through MoneySmart. I know many of you use the tools and resources on MoneySmart with your clients, and I thank you for that. We need to continue to provide trusted sources of guidance because people risk being exploited by these technologies. The goal of lifting the financial capability within the community is one we share. The Minister mentioned the importance of agency. That's got to be the fundamental strategy. There are, of course, always business models emerging that test the regulatory perimeter. Most recently, we have witnessed unscrupulous actors trying to exploit the significant pot of money in our superannuation system through what we suspect is industrial-scale misconduct. Everyday Australians who signed up for a free super check have instead lost their life savings. We must disrupt the lead generation model. that has enabled the conveyor belt of consumer harm to occur. One way to do it, from my personal view, and something the government I know is consulting on, would be to ban unlicensed communications about superannuation. After all, super is one of the biggest assets many of us, many ordinary Australians, accumulate in our lifetimes. The people talking about it should be appropriately qualified. We wouldn't let someone perform heart surgery just because they watched a lot of it on ER. Therefore, we shouldn't let people who aren't qualified lure Australians into losing their life savings and turn a profit from it. In my view, the most effective way to address this misconduct is to stop it at the source, and a ban on unlicensed communications would certainly go a long way to achieving that. So, there are always new risks emerging, and meeting all these challenges means ASIC cannot stand still. It requires us to continually invest in technology, into data, and into capability. Moreover, it requires us to be bold and explore the full protective reach of our laws. It requires us to be proactive in identifying new and emerging risks, and requires us to continually reshape ourselves in response to the problems of the day. Those challenges mean that the job of transformation will never be done at ASIC, but I know I leave the task in excellent hands. To conclude, I would like to return for a moment to where I started today with the prosecutor they called the Hellhound. If there is one lesson to be drawn from Ferdinand Bacora's story, is that accountability works best when it is seen and when it is felt. It is not enough to enforce the rules quietly. Confidence depends on people seeing them enforced, and that means regulators cannot work from behind closed doors, and watchdogs need to both bark and bite to be effective. I hope my remarks today have assured you that ASIC is that kind of regulator, and that when you come to us with serious concerns, we're going to listen and we're going to be onto it. I want to thank again Dominique and to the FCA for inviting me to speak. I should say on a personal note, this is my last speech as ASIC Chair. Thank you.
Either one. Well, thank you, Joe, and what an honour for this to be the exit interview.
Well, that's already happened. We can't call this an exit interview.
You have changed the stance and the attitude of ASIC. I mean, your successor's name is literally Court. What's your ambition for the coming years for the regulator?
Well, it's to continue what we've started. So when Sarah and I started, we were on the back foot. We need to be frank about that. And my vision for ASIC, and I think people have worked with me closely, must be sick of hearing it, but a day does not pass when I don't remind everybody, why are we here? We want to be a modern, confident, ambitious regulator. They're the three key things I constantly talk about with staff, with the senior leadership team, and indeed with everyone who works with ASIC, because that's what it's going to continue taking, to address the issues we are being asked to deal with.
You can't be everywhere. You touched on this in the speech. How much do you rely on the sector collectively to bring you what you need to take action?
Oh, it's hugely important. I mean, like even this morning, I learned about some new issues that I hadn't heard of before. There's just so much going on. So I think the first critical thing is that I feel very strongly that ASIC needs to systematically engage with the community and this sector in particular, so we know what's going on. If we don't know what's going on, we don't even get to as the Americans say, to the bathroom. We have clueless. So it's extremely important that we're listening carefully to everything that the sector's telling us. Secondly, and I mentioned this in the speech, the reality of regulation, or one of the realities of regulation, is you are making choices all the time. But you want to be making those choices from a well-informed, rational position. Now, in the end, that we get intelligence and feedback, formal and informal, from a lot of the people in this room and more broadly, and it's extremely helpful. Our job is to give people confidence that we're listening and that we actually understand what we're being told. And secondly, be transparent about why we place more priority on one issue over another. And again, the dialogue and engagement of the people in this room help us get that right, hopefully. But in the end, it's on us to make decisions about whether we take a matter on or not. But I hope that if we follow that approach, that it'll give people confidence to say, oh, we really wanted ASIC to handle 10 problems. They're only able to handle 5, but we understand why. And I think that builds confidence, and it's in the public interest that a regulator with limited resources is using them to best effect.
You talked about prevention and cure, essentially the fence at the top of the cliff or the ambulance at the bottom. Right. With ASIC and more broadly, when you look at financial harms and scams and people trying to do ill, do you think we have the mix right on those two forces?
Oh, look, I think we have to invest a lot more in prevention, frankly. I've talked at other places about financial literacy, and I think the Minister's use of the word agency is another great concept. My word's a bit more legalistic, is that I want everyone to be equipped and empowered to be able to act in their own interests. That's the key. People need to have enough confidence and knowledge of what's going on in the world and the system that as each new opportunity arises to invest in something or to spend on something, that they're in a good position to make a decision in their own interests, which is another way of defining agency. Prevention's got to be better than cure, has to be. So investment in money smart, in our schools, in our families, in the way in which we talk about these issues, in the way in which we talk about risk and return, the more we do that, the more likely that the losses, and I've said this publicly as well, we'll always have losses. But obviously we want to minimise those losses. But prevention is much better than cure. Secondly, I think when we define cure, of course we're going to litigate and do the best we can to hold individuals and companies accountable for serious misconduct. But we're not going to catch everybody. And secondly, for those people who suffer losses, we're not equipped or resourced. It's not part of our mandate to recover all those losses. So the important thing is that we have an open dialogue and conversation with the Australian community to say, look, you've got superannuation, you've got insurance, we have a fairly sophisticated system around financial services in Australia. We have to help people understand that system and empower them to navigate it. The more we do that, I think we will see losses being at some minimal level rather than at some awful level.
The power of technology, and particularly artificial intelligence, in the realm of scams. You took down 12,000 scam websites last year. I can't tell whether that's an amazing or a terrible number because it's such a big field, and what technology does is make it flatter, make it easier to get into this grim business. You obviously can't do it yourself. Is there enough cooperation from the tech companies to deal with these problems as they arise?
These are very significant challenges for regulators in the community. We have an extraordinary concentration of power in a small number of companies or digital platforms. We have to keep engaging with them to ensure that the harms that are obviously occurring stop or are minimised. But I take a broader position, going back to some earlier remarks. If I was to point to one theme that I think all of us, particularly our children, are grappling with, is technology. The AI phenomenon is absolutely extraordinary, and it's something I've been studying for some time now. But there are two recent examples. I mentioned agentic AI in the speech, but one of our biggest retailers is now predicting that somewhere around 15% of its revenues are going to be driven by bots. Hopefully there are some humans in the background, but that's extraordinary. That we weren't having that conversation even 12 months ago, and we now have this emerging issue around Claude Mythos. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Which is a technology Anthropic invented, which is very good at finding vulnerabilities in entities' cyber defences. Now, if we don't get a grip on that, then the consequences are serious and immediate. So I think all things technology and data is a conversation that we all need to be having. And what I worry about from a specifically ASIC perspective is that we need to be on that. We need to be understanding those technologies and use them for our own purposes to be more efficient and productive, and to be able to have the capability to investigate when things go wrong in that area externally. And secondly, we need to understand what's going on externally. And that is a non-trivial challenge because of the rapidity of change.
On a different topic, it's still early, but are there lessons already from Shield and First Guardian?
Yeah. Well, I think there are, and those lessons are, I think, best understood and learned through the various law reform proposals that are being consulted on at the moment. We have a situation now. But superannuation, let me really step back. Superannuation has been an enormous success, I think, in Australia. It's virtually every adult Australian has a superannuation account, and it's frankly a widely admired system globally, and it's now grown to around $4.5 trillion. So where there's a lot of money, bad actors like to play. And so that's the issue we're all dealing with. And the Shield and First Guardian saga really revealed, in my words, some vulnerabilities and issues with the way the system's working at the moment. And I think the law reform proposals, I think Treasury, the government, ASIC's response to that. So you see some lessons learned in the way in which we're trying to amend the law. But there are some other lessons, and again, this is something I know this group feels passionately about. People need to understand what their super's there for and where it should be safely put. And if they're worried about whether they're getting a sufficient return, they've got to be given, ordinary people have got to be given some safe way of answering that question and having access to financial advice or counselling that reassures them to say, look, leave your money in that fund. If you're going to change funds, be really careful. And I think this risk return sort of goes back to financial literacy. If there's one theme I'm constantly pressing people about is to understand risk. Even highly intelligent people get risk assessment wrong. So the way I like to explain it to my kids and grandchildren, once they're old enough to understand, is that if someone's offering you more than 3 or 4% above a fixed term deposit with a major bank, that's called a risky investment. And so this whole risk concept. So I think that's a big lesson learned. I think a lot of people were lured into, with good intent, wanting to get a better return on their super, and it all went pear-shaped.
As you retire from the role, you've massively changed the regulator. As you look back, is there anything where you think, I should have gone harder on that?
Or harder on everything. That got me into trouble a couple of times. I'm not known for patience as being one of the top 3 virtues. I think we did as much as we could. I did as much as I could in the 5 years that we inherited. Some significant governance issues. It took time to resolve, and it just takes time. So I think the restructuring mostly worked well. In the first 12 or 18 months, I instituted an infrastructure review. So a lot has changed, but when I don't regret. You do your best with what you know at the time. I think I've had the privilege of working with some extraordinary colleagues. Some of them are here today. And so that's as good as it gets.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, Joe. Wait. So could I. We've all, please, that's fine. We've all signed the card. There's a cake in the tea room. But for now, the applause. Please join me in thanking again Joe Longo. Thank you.